Brothers and sisters in Christ, over the last few weeks we've been looking at some of the contemporary challenges to faith in Jesus Christ and the Gospels and His resurrection, the kind of criticisms, critiques that have been leveled at traditional Christian teaching. There's a lot of them. I won't be able to get through all of them in the context of this sermon series because this is going to be the last one for now. So today I thought I would work off of what the Gospel gives us. The Gospel gives us that parable of the wicked vine dressers. And it's pretty clear that we know what Jesus was talking about in the context of this parable. He was saying, hey, the prophets have come over and over again, and they've suffered abuse, they've even been killed, they've been run out, they've been given a hard time. Look at the time of Elijah in particular. When God sends His own Son, will the people respond to Him any better? No. They will say, here's the Son, let us seize His inheritance, let us kill Him. And He was foretelling His own death at the hands of a lawless people. Now, one of the main critiques throughout centuries, but which has recently found kind of new life in a kind of a new form, has been the rejection of Jesus' claim to be this promised Messiah that God would send. And we see those who wish to kind of rethink or rework or re-edit the Old Testament prophecies to diminish the interpretation of them that would lead us to understanding that they're talking about Jesus. And in particular, we see with the advent of groups like Jews for Jesus, for example, the Messianic Jewish movement, there were a lot of Jews who rediscovered the ideas of the Messiah and recognized that, oh my gosh, we hate to admit it, but this Jesus really does fulfill the profile of the Messiah. Now, not surprisingly, they were pretty successful and suffered a backlash from within the more conservative and Orthodox Jewish circles, so that now there's Jews for Judaism. And they're kind of one of the leading groups that's leveling this new response, new critique against traditional Christian interpretation of the prophets. And there's a number of little kind of nitpicky things you could look at. For example, you could look at, does Isaiah really say who will be born of a virgin? In Greek, it's Parthenos, it's very clearly virgin, which is the Septuagint. But in the Hebrew Masoretic text, it's more like Alma, which is kind of like a young maiden. I mean, this is kind of really nitpicky, honestly. I mean, a traditional Jewish mindset is if you're a young maiden, that implies virginity. And in either case, that doesn't really make or break anything. But what we do see a more serious critique, probably the most serious critique that they can level, is saying, well, you know, Jesus didn't fulfill the messianic profile because He didn't do one very important thing. Do you know what that is? He didn't establish the kingdom. He didn't establish the for everlasting political state that they were expecting. And this was the problem in Jesus' time. They were looking for a Messiah who was going to come and establish a kingdom in the sense that they thought of kingdoms. A kingdom in the sense of a nation state, a body politic, a form of governance. The government will be on His shoulders, as Isaiah, doesn't it? And so Christians, this is probably the hardest critique we have to say, yeah, well, Jesus, He didn't establish a government. He didn't do that. However, that is not to say that He didn't establish a kingdom. Very clearly, He established a kingdom to which many people belong. In fact, whole nations have historically belonged to that kingdom, to Christendom, to the commonwealth of faithful people throughout the world. And there are certainly millions and millions of people today who call Christ their king. So does he have a kingdom? Yeah, it's a kingdom without borders, which one would expect, by the way, for an everlasting kingdom, and a kingdom which is based on a divine reality and not an earthly one. So Christ is a king without borders, without limits. His kingdom is everywhere his people are. And throughout history, people have remained strong in their faith to their king, their loyalty to their king, even at the cost of their own life at the hands of earthly kings and earthly governments and earthly rulers. Well, maybe that's not satisfying enough for those. They really think it has to be absolutely this. Well, remember that Jesus isn't done yet. This is an important thing. There are certain things that had to happen in the life of the Messiah that Jesus has fulfilled. And in fact, there are certain things that if Jesus hasn't fulfilled them, then nobody has. Because the time of their happening, the possibility of their fulfillment has already passed. And I'm speaking of the time of the Second Temple. The Messiah was expected to come during the time of the Second Temple, because the Second Temple, remember the first temple that Solomon built was destroyed by the Babylonians and so forth, and then it was rebuilt by Herod, and it was finally finished right around the time of the birth of Christ. But it lacked something that the Temple of Solomon had. When Solomon and his architects finished the temple, and they consecrated the temple, and they offered prayer to God, what happened to that temple? Do you remember? It says that the glory of the Lord came into the temple, and it filled the holy place, such that no one could even go into the altar. The Shekinah, the presence of God, was manifest, just as it had been manifest in the tabernacle of meeting before him. And this was the sign that God was pleased and accepted this temple. His presence was made known there. In fact, that's how the ancient world called God. He is the God who lives in that temple. He is the God who sits on the throne of the cherubim, who sits above the Ark of the Covenant. That's how they understood who God was. The man, the God who lived in that place. That's where you could go to meet him. But the second temple of Herod didn't have that. The second temple of Herod, they built it, it was grand of scale, but it lacked the glory of God. There was no presence of God manifest there when it was fulfilled. But is that actually the case? The glory of God did fill the temple on many, many occasions, because Jesus Christ himself came into that temple. He himself was present in that place. So he did fulfill that. If he is the Son of God, if he is equally divine with his Father, then the second temple has fulfilled that, but only through Jesus Christ. And it was said that certain things had to happen in the time of that second temple, that God would come and fill that, for the Messiah to come. Now in AD 70, the temple was destroyed by the Romans. So if God hadn't come and filled the temple with his presence at some point between the birth of Christ and AD 70, then guess what? Throw out the Bible, because it's not going to happen. It's done. The chance has passed. It's over with. So the Messiah had to come. It is said in one of the Talmudic traditions that for 40 years before the destruction of the temple, every year that they offered the atoning sacrifice, they looked for signs to see whether God was pleased and accepted the atoning sacrifice, and whether he had, in fact, taken away the sin of the nation. And for 40 years, it came up negative. Now, what happened 40 years before AD 70? In AD 30 is when most scholars believe that that was the year of the crucifixion. We say, the whole concept of Anno Domini AD is actually a later invention. They didn't start using that until many centuries later. So the birth of Christ probably didn't actually happen in 1 AD, it probably happened in 4 BC. So Christ, 33 years of age, dies in 30 AD, and for 40 years following that, God does not accept any of the atoning sacrifices that are made in the temple until the temple is destroyed. Why is that? Why would God do that? Well, for a Christian point of view, it's very simple. God already fulfilled all of the temple sacrifices, the atonement of the entire world, in the sacrifice of his Son on the cross. He is the Messiah. He fulfilled everything that was required of him in the prophets and in the law. And the temple was made obsolete. And ever since then, there has been no temple and no functioning priesthood in Judaism. Why would God take away from his people the most powerful means of forgiveness that they had available to them for 20 centuries? Why would it be gone? Why is there no more priesthood? Why is there no more atoning sacrifice available for the people of God? Because that atoning sacrifice is available for the people of God. It has been available for the people of God and for all the people of the world since AD 30. Because that atoning sacrifice is made in the person of Jesus Christ. So has he finished his kingdom? Has he brought his kingdom on earth? Well, he said himself, the Son of Man will come again in glory on the clouds with the angels and will usher in the kingdom. He hasn't finished his work with us yet. He is waiting for every human being that ever will be born to be born. Because his kingdom will encompass all of humanity. All people who have ever lived. All people who will ever have believed in him will be the citizens of his kingdom. So we're still in the midst of the fulfillment of Messianic prophecy today. So if you hear somebody say, oh no, he can't be the Messiah. The Messiah didn't do this or he didn't do that. Jesus never fulfilled all those things. You say, well, wait and see. Wait and see. He's done everything so far. And he's also predicted all the things that would come to pass. He predicted the destruction of the temple that would happen 40 years after his death. No other prophet ever mentioned that. And he is still fulfilling his kingdom amongst us every day. Every single time a person comes to faith in Jesus Christ and says, you are my Lord. You are my Savior. You are my Messiah. You are the one that God sent to save me, and my people, in my land, in my day. Then that messianic prophecy is still being fulfilled in our world today. So do not lose your hope. Do not lose your faith. Rather, see it multiply. Share the great joy of the Messiah. Christ our God bless you always, now and ever.